I come to the garden alone, while the dew is still on the roses, and the voice I hear falling on my ear, the Son of God discloses, and he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. He speaks, and the sound of his voice is so sweet, the birds hush their singing, and the melody that he gave to me within my heart is ringing. I'd stay in the garden with him, though the night around me be falling, but he bids me go through the voice of woe. His voice to me is calling, and he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. Changing trends in church music was the discussion topic at a dinner party I attended a few years ago in a seminary campus. This is a story by Don Husted. The wife of a theology professor complained that song leaders and choir directors seemed to ignore many favorite hymns, such as In the Garden. "You don't sing the old favorites that we learned as youngsters," she said. "I've even heard some church musicians criticize In the Garden as sentimental and meaningless." I couldn't resist the temptation. "What garden?" I asked. "What difference does it make, what garden?" she retorted with just a little heat. The truth is, it makes quite a lot of difference. If the hymn is just a childhood favorite with pleasant phrases about gardens and birds and roses, it cannot be really meaningful in a vital worship experience. Today, this kind of an attachment for a song is a superficial emotion, which is a good example of what we call sentimentality. But it doesn't have to be that way. There was a garden, and the hymn can be meaningful. C. Austin Miles, the composer, gives us the clue himself. One day, in March 1912, I was seated in the dark room where I kept my photographic equipment and organ. I drew my Bible towards me. It opened at my favorite chapter, John 20. That meeting of Jesus and Mary had lost none of its power to charm. As I read it that day, I seemed to be part of the scene. I became a silent witness to that dramatic moment in Mary's life when she knelt before her Lord and cried, "Rabboni!" Under the inspiration of this vision, I wrote as quickly as the words could be formed the poem exactly as it has since appeared. That same evening I wrote the music. And that's from 40 Gospel Hymns and Stories by George W. Sandville. The specific reference to a garden becomes much clearer when we learn that C. Austin Miles was writing about the first Easter morning and the garden in which Jesus was buried. It was here Mary Magdalene came alone very early while the dew was still on the roses. When Jesus first spoke to her, she thought it was the gardener, but when he called her by name, she recognized his voice. It's difficult to imagine what Mary's feelings and actions were at that moment. She had seen Jesus die on the cross. She was now coming to anoint his dead body with spices. But there he was, standing before her and talking to her. He was alive. She may have been startled at first, but when his identity became clear, she was filled with joy, as the song says, like a melody ringing in her heart. No doubt Mary wanted nothing more than to stay there in the garden with Jesus, but he ordered her to go and tell his disciples what had happened. Mary's experience is relived by every person who confronts the risen Christ and realizes his presence in the routine of daily life. We too can walk and talk with Christ and be assured that we belong to him. This experience is very real to a believer and brings joy that is beyond any other satisfaction. Indeed, it may sometimes seem that no one else has ever known as much delight as we experience walking each day with Christ. At least, this was the author Miles' conviction when he wrote, "The joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known." When we take time to know Christ intimately through prayer and meditation, we too can feel that we want to stay in his presence forever. But he bids us go, as he did Mary, to tell others of his death, his resurrection and ascension, and his promise of coming again. His command to us to go is, in a sense, a voice of woe, because men must be warned to turn from their sins if they are to escape God's judgment, and we are the only messengers God has to take this news to the world. As Paul the Apostle said, "Woe unto me if I preach not the gospel." "In the Garden" was a favorite song during the days of Homer Rodeheber, who led singing for Billy Sunday campaigns. It can be just as significant today if we remember its true meaning as we sing.